Production funding for Another View comes from the Hampton Citizens Unity Commission, using the time, talents, and skills of a broad base of citizen volunteers to help break down racial and cultural barriers, working to achieve the City of Hampton's community plan for a healthy, diverse community. And from the African American Programming Advisory Group, community visionaries assisting WHRO to engage, enlighten, educate, and entertain all communities in Hampton Roads. And now, Another View.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee, and welcome to Another View. What comes to mind when you hear the word police? Is it an image of officer-friendly helping small children and the elderly cross the street? Or is it one of fear that the police are there to harm rather than help? The relationship between African-American communities and the police in this country has at times been combative, racially charged, and even deadly. But are things changing? Here to talk about it from a police perspective is Bruce Marquis, Chief of Police for Norfolk, and Kelvin Wright, Chief of Police for Chesapeake. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Historically, and you could go back through the civil rights, riots and so forth, there was always a tension between the black community and the police departments. Is that same tension still here?
Oh, I think it is. I think a lot of it is still here. There's still a significant mistrust by the black community in this country of the police. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, yeah, it's still here, and it takes a lot of effort to overcome that. And I know that Kelvin and I are working very hard with our respective departments to try to overcome that with our respective communities.
Why is it? Why is it that distrust there?
I think part of the reason is that sometimes perhaps the police don't necessarily look like the people who are policing them. And I think that is one of the things that has changed, particularly in our community, is that the number of officers of minority, whether they're African Americans, Spanish, or what have you, are increasing. And I think that the community expects to see someone that looks like them coming in their community to conduct police operations.
Now, you all are both African American males, mm-hmm. and you're leading Chesapeake and Norfolk. Is there an expectation from the black community then that somehow you help to repair this, to change the culture?
Well, I would think so. I think not only from the community, but from the city leadership also. Mm-hmm. I know that may be one of the unspoken reasons why I was hired here 5 years ago as Chief of Police, and that is to continue to repair, to mend, and to make better the relations between the police and the community. After all, Norfolk is about 44% black or African American, and as Kelvin said, we have to do everything we can, and one of the ways to mend those fences, if you will, is certainly to recruit or attempt to recruit and hire more members of society that look like the particular community. So we want more women, we want more minorities on board with us.
Are people, when police go into neighborhoods, because having worked for a police department also, I know that there's also that idea sometimes from on the police officer's perspective that they are just as concerned about what they're going to face within that community as the people who live in that community are afraid of what they're going to face from the police.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable assumption. For the most part, when you get to a community or officers working in a particular community, it's the community attitudes and expectations that perhaps drive the type of enforcement action that may be taking place, whatever the community standard may be. But when police officers encounter citizens who are having difficulties and are trying to get those issues remedied, whether they're law enforcement or some other governmental issue, we try to be there to help them and direct them in the right path. However, if that mistrust is present, it is difficult at best to accomplish the goal. However, I think that we have that obligation nonetheless, because these are our citizens. They're not customers, they're citizens, and they're taxpayers. I think that we have that obligation to go that extra step to try to reach out to the community and help the community understand what it is that we're trying to do and to help make the community better.
Let's be frank, black on black crime is off the chain. I mean, you were telling me some statistics earlier, Chief Marquis.
Yeah, absolutely. In Norfolk, for instance, and I just gave a brief in the City Council with regard to the number of murders or homicides we've had this year, 80% of the victims, 83% of the victims are black, and 80% of the suspects are black. And this is pretty typical of what we see across the country when you have communities that are somewhat similar to Norfolk in terms of the percentage of minorities, the percentage of minorities. Now, it just doesn't have to be black on black. It could be Hispanic on Hispanic, but typically
it's intra-racial.
And that's right, as Kelvin said earlier, it's intra, and that's a shame. That's a real tragedy.
So then when those communities, if that's happening more and more, they see police more and more in a light of trying to stop something or to make an arrest, or they don't see them in the civic, going to a civic league type atmosphere. That can also contribute to why the perception is a little different in these neighborhoods.
At times. Yes. I think that most importantly, people realize that we are friends of the community and we're part of the community, not apart from. And I think that most of the time, citizens who live in a particular area where there's a significant amount of crime, a lot of homicides, I think there's a reluctance for a number of reasons why they're unwilling to come forward, certainly fear retribution being one of them. But it goes back to something I think Bruce will agree with me. Roughly, it's that 10% that creates 90% of our problems. And it seems like that 10% seems to be able to exercise an undue influence on a particular community. So I think that Bruce's approach is very similar to mine, is that we try to identify who that 10% is and go after them so that we can make the community better for those who want a better community.
And I know my media colleagues are going to kill me, but do we play a role in that also? Because it seems like the more murders that are covered, the more homicides and so forth, and we're showing a black person as the suspect, the black person as the victim. Does that help to also exacerbate the lack of trust?
Well, I think that's a good word. I don't think it exacerbates the lack of trust between the community and the police. I think it certainly, I think, spreads fear outside of the black community when they see so much of that negative coverage about what's taking place within the black community, and that's a shame. But that's more localized news, if you will, versus what takes place on a national level. And I was speaking to you about this earlier. On a national level, it seems like national media tends to forget this problem, and this is a problem. This is a travesty in this country. We have so many black people killing other black people, and a lot of these are a substantial number of kids. We have so many Hispanic killing Hispanics in this country, and yet it gets glossed over. And I don't want to say that the national media is racist. However, they would rather cover a young white woman who's in some kind of trouble, maybe has been killed or is lost or something like that, than to talk about what's going on in this country in communities, in black communities throughout this country.
As a matter of fact, there was a young lady, this was a couple years ago, I think, who was kidnapped and so forth, and there was this huge national cry, but there was also an African-American girl who faced the same thing. And finally, they came out with the story, but that was way after the fact.
In agreement. I think that part of the issue is certainly fear for the wrong reasons. I think that a lot of people see a lot of things in the media about black-on-black crime and seems to think that it spills over into other portions of the community. In some cases it does, but most often it does not.
People who live in low-income neighborhoods, okay, for the most part, are hardworking people who are trying to make it and who are trying to live on a day-to-day basis. I had a conversation recently with a person who was not black, who wanted to know how come people won't tell if they know about a crime or if they know about an incident that has happened. Why won't they call the police?
Well, I don't know, Barbara, that I agree with that in its totality. Okay. I think there's a certain element that certainly will not tell. If you belong to a gang, for instance, and we've heard enough about gangs, perhaps too much about gangs, but if you belong to a gang and you get swept up in the police net due to some investigation, and we're asking about other activities of the gang, those sort of people tend not to tell. But I think the people that you describe, hard-working people who live in these neighborhoods, they're the same as anyone else. outside of that community, and they want to work with the police. They have a great respect for the police, and they do have a positive interaction with us, and those people are willing to tell. Unfortunately, they're the ones who probably have very little knowledge, and therefore they can't go to the police and give us any information that will lead to the arrest, because that's right, they're not part of that.
Yeah, right.
But the people who are part of it, and these are people who generally have long history with the police on the wrong side of the law, are the ones who've become mute on these things.
And I have to agree with Bruce, if you don't mind. I, like Bruce, I've attended a number of community functions and forums and so forth, and I can tell you from a certain segment of the black community, particularly older people such as ourselves, what have you, they are
Speak
very...
for yourself.
I apologize. I'm amazed, and actually it's actually refreshing to see that people of color are for law and order. They want safe communities to live and play and come home to and so forth. But as Bruce was saying, I think there's a certain segment in all of our communities that seem to have this closed mouth and so forth, and they're not committing the crimes where people such as ourselves would intervene or call the police. And therefore, they exercise great control over the community because they have instilled a degree of fear. And of course, seniors or older people may know who did it or suspect, but they don't necessarily know.
No, the information.
That's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about how police, the face of a police has changed recently. Both of you have advanced degrees. When my father, who was a police officer in Maryland, he was the first African American to become a captain for toll facilities police in Maryland. That was back in the early 80s. I hope I got that right. But for a long time, a lot of police officers did not have college education. They had high school, maybe. It was more about size and force as opposed to smarts. What's going on today in police departments? What's changing?
Well, there are some things changing, but it's not changing fast enough, in my opinion. Let me go back to when I was in Texas, for instance. I sat on the board of the licensing agency in Texas, and one of the things we were trying to pass, and this was back in the 90s, was a requirement that anyone who came into law enforcement in Texas had to have as a minimum an associate's degree. And that got voted down by about 75–76% of the chiefs of police. Okay, they didn't want that. They wanted to maintain the standard of a high school or GED. We're still seeing a lot of that today. We encourage college-educated folks to come onto the Norfolk Police Department. Matter of fact, you cannot get promoted in this department unless you have a degree, minimum an associate's degree, and at some levels you have to have at least a bachelor's degree. But I'm seeing more young people come in with degrees now. We're seeing more former military people come in who have a large number of credits towards a degree. But we're still seeing I would say about 50% are still those with high school education or GED. We're trying to encourage a change in that, and hopefully one day, if we're going to continue to call ourselves professionals, and that's the term we use, then we have to ramp up the education standard.
What does that do for a department when you have an educated department?
I think it's certainly beneficial to the department and the community in which we serve. We live in a more complex world than we did many years ago. And I think that someone who comes to the table with a college degree, whether it's an associate's, bachelor's, or higher, equips them with certain skills and more tools, better to able to do the job. I think that when we talk about policing, it's not what it once was. I mean, at its base level it is, but still, when you're talking about interacting with citizens and being able to solve the issues that they have, the more tools you have in your tool chest, the better you are able to resolve it.
Because you really are solving things beyond crime.
Yes, you are.
And a lot of instances. For example, I know in Prince George's County, we had the broken window theory.
Yes.
And we did community policing, which is something that both of you do also. But tell us about the broken window theory and what that means.
Yeah, quite simply, if you allow the small things to add up, then the community goes to heck in the handbasket, so to speak. So, you know, if you have a house, for instance, that has trash and high grass and all that, then that can spread throughout community. But it certainly sends a signal that perhaps that person doesn't care then the block doesn't care, then the neighborhood doesn't care, and it invites the criminal element in there because that's what they're attracted to. So you have to start with the little things. You have to stay on top of the little things, and that just is not the police.
Right.
That's not just our responsibility.
Exactly.
That's a citywide responsibility.
And that's a neighborhood responsibility.
And that's where community policing comes in. You know, it's community-oriented policing, but it takes every facet of a community to keep a community safe and secure. And so certainly there are other departments within the city government that have to come out and do their parts, but the people themselves have to do their parts. And so that's basically, in a nutshell, what the broken windows theory is about.
And if I may, I think Bruce is right on point. I think that a lot of people who live in communities have forgotten that they have a civic responsibility to not just look after their own property, but look to your neighbor as well. You don't have to be the ogre on the street, but I think you should be the person who can go to your neighbor and say, you know, we have a good community here. Perhaps you need to cut your grass, you know, take better care of your property, so that, you know, it keeps the community uplifted.
Exactly. Now, we only have a couple minutes left, and I know that there's a huge convention coming here. I believe it's in July?
Yes, that's July 23rd through July 29th.
And that's NOBLE, which stands for?
National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And when we talk about the face of police and how it's changing it and how we want the black community, for instance, in this case, to have more of a trust in law enforcement, here's an opportunity to have some interaction with members of black members of the law enforcement profession who will be coming here for this training conference in July.
So it is training also. They're going to be coming from all over the country.
Well, this is a training conference. Make no mistake about it. They'll be coming from all over the country. We think because of the recession, we'll see far fewer numbers than in other cities where the conference has been held. But we're still anticipating upwards of 2,000 members, NOBLE members, to come. Let me say this, it is not an exclusive club. NOBLE has reached out, and the membership is pretty diverse nowadays. So we're not all black in NOBLE, but you know, one of the highlights of the conference will be a memorial parade, or march rather, that'll take place on the Wednesday morning, and I forget the date of that. I guess it will be July 28th or 29th, in which we'll all be in uniform and marching from downtown Norfolk through. We'll start at the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, rather, and we'll march around and end up back on St. Paul's at Dr. Murray's church over there. So it's a historic organization, and people need to come out and support us.
And NOBLE was started because there needed to be a brotherhood of African Americans who were moving up?
Well, no. NOBLE actually started out of the same concerns that we've been talking about throughout this show here. The concern about the black-on-black crime, the socioeconomic conditions in the black community. It started in 1976 by the then handful, you mentioned your father, by the then handful of black police executives in this country who came together and said, we need to try to address this as a group because it's not being addressed outside of outside of the African American community.
Gotcha. We've got about 2 minutes, maybe a little less. If you wanted to say something to the community in terms of policing, in terms of all of us getting along and working together, what would you say, Chief Wright?
I would say that tap into the resources that are available to you. There are a tremendous number of people and organizations that want to make any community better and safer and reach out to young people to get them set on the right road. There are religious organizations, fraternal organizations, and civic organizations, and nonprofits that are out there trying to make life better for everyone. And all you have to do is give us a call. We'll put you in touch with the right organization so that your community can be better. Okay, and Chief Marquis, well, we have about 30 seconds.
We have a Citizens Police Academy in Norfolk. Please come and join it. You'll have a better understanding of what we do as a police department and our concerns about our community here. But I agree with Kelvin. Get involved with the community. Get involved with your civic leagues or civic associations. And work with the police. We're here to help you. We all want the community to be safe and secure.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and I hope that people take to heart and listen, especially about the broken glass theory or broken window theory, if you will. Keep up those neighborhoods. It keeps the riffraff out, as they say. Thank you so much, and our thanks to Chief Marquis and Chief Wright for their candor and insight today. Coming up next, a rite of passage designed to ensure that young black men are tied to greatness. But first, a look at what's happening here in Hampton Roads. Welcome back, everybody. It is a rite of passage from boyhood to manhood. A father teaching his son how to tie a tie. But for far too many African American boys, there are no fathers around to do the teaching. Recently, a group of concerned men in our community decided to pick up where others have left off. And as Lisa Godley tells us, they taught young men not only how to tie a tie, but how to be tied to greatness.
Hundreds of young men recently piled into the auditorium at Lake Taylor High School for what some believe was a life-changing experience. They came to learn a simple task, the art of tying a tie, but they took away so much more.
We know that there is such a pervasive image of the gangster image that they see on TV and all of those things, but what we want to say is you have positive men who care about you in this community that stand as an example of greatness right in front of you. And at this time, I would like all of the men that have come tonight, if you would stand. All of the men stand. Give these young men a round of applause. We applaud their greatness. We applaud their strength. We applaud their destiny. We applaud their potential.
A custom clothier by profession, Alex Ellis founded the Tied to Greatness program, and through it is changing the lives of young men from the inside out.
Let me ask a question. Have any of you young men ever been into a store, and adult men as well, and had a salesperson follow you around the entire time? And I asked young men all across the country, well, what did you have on? And the young man would say, well, I had on a hoodie, or I had on a pair of jeans, or I had a big white t-shirt. And young men, it's important that you understand that the minute you walk into a store, the minute you leave your house, your image is communicating. Your image is talking. Your image is speaking. And your image can say that this young man poses a threat. He's coming to rob us. Or, you know what, I'll let another salesperson cater to you because I know you're not serious about purchasing out of my store. You could have just gotten paid and have a pocket full of cash. But the perception is, here's another thug coming in my store.
Ellis didn't deliver his message that image is power alone. He brought along an arsenal of strong, productive, well-dressed men from across Hampton Roads to serve as role models and mentors.
Some of you out there don't have fathers or you have poor role models. Do not let it be an excuse for you to not be the father, the man that you don't have.
After hearing from well-known professionals from across the area, it was time to learn the skill that for generations has been a rite of passage for many, the art of tying a tie.
Historically, a father would teach a son, but unfortunately, in many of our inner cities, our young men, we're finding that 75% of them are products of single-parent homes. So then what we do is we say that if you don't have a man in your life, we will stand as a role model for you. And we will make sure that you are equipped to walk into your destiny and walk into manhood. And see, we don't want to leave you without knowing how to tie a tie.
The goal of this program is to turn these young men into men of character and integrity with goals and standards that they apply to their everyday lives, even when nobody's looking.
And I salute the men that are here today.
Whether the message came from a professional athlete, an entrepreneur, or an entertainer, those we talked to definitely got something out of it.
Don't let anyone change your own future and destiny. That was one of the main ones that everybody kept shooting at, and it made a big impression.
When the man that ran track, he told me he never gave up, and he worked as hard as he could to get where he got, I felt that was very inspirational to me. That makes me want to work my hardest to get somewhere in life.
I will look beyond my environment.
I will look beyond my environment.
Push through any obstacles.
Push through any obstacles.
And learn from my mistakes.
And learn from my mistakes.
Because I am tied to greatness. Give yourselves a round of applause.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And the next time someone tells you that there's nothing positive happening in our community, you just send them right here to Another View. As always, we appreciate you joining us to watch this show. You can always send us your comments at www.anotherview.tv or write us at 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk. Next week, a look at public-private partnerships from an African American perspective. We'll see you next time for Another View.
Production funding for Another View comes from Hampton's 400th Anniversary Committee and the Hampton Neighborhood Commission, partnering with neighborhoods throughout the city, working hand in hand to create vibrant places we are proud to call home and celebrate. And from the African American Programming Advisory Group, community visionaries assisting WHRO to engage, enlighten, educate, and entertain all communities in Hampton Roads.